The story of Waterloo begins not on the muddy fields of Belgium, but in the brittle silence of exile, and in the fevered dreams of a man who once held the world in his hands. Napoleon, the emperor, had been a thunderclap that shook the foundations of Europe. His return from Elba was the tremor that promised a second, greater storm. Across the continent, thrones wobbled, alliances fractured, and the scent of gunpowder, fear, and ambition returned to the air. The year 1815 was a breath held in anticipation, a pause before destiny's final crushing blow. Europe's response was immediate and absolute. The Seventh Coalition. Britain, Prussia, Austria, Russia. Old enemies bound by a singular paralyzing dread of Bonaparte's return. Armies mobilized across vast distances, converging toward the Low Countries, an anvil upon which the ambition of the emperor would either be reforged or smashed forever. The world watched, sensing that this conflict would not be measured in battles, but in the fate of centuries. Napoleon, sensing the net tightening, moved with the lightning speed that had once defined his legend. His aim was simple: defeat the British and Prussian forces in Belgium before the Austrians and Russians could arrive. He intended to slice through the coalition's deployed strength with the surgical precision of a master duelist, separating his enemies and confronting them one by one. His Imperial Guard, the grognards, the grumblers, followed him with a faith bordering on fanaticism, their boots striking the cobblestones with the rhythm of inexorable fate. The air around the emperor throbbed with a terrifying confidence, a belief that destiny, having brought him back, would not abandon him now. The first clash came at Ligny and Quatre Bras. Brief, violent rehearsals for the main event. At Ligny, the Prussians under Blücher were savaged but not destroyed. Their retreat, a disciplined, agonizing march toward Wavre. At Quatre Bras, the Duke of Wellington, the Iron Duke, cool, calculating, and utterly unforgiving, held his ground, denying Napoleon the swift path he craved. The emperor had won, but he had not won decisively. The victories were tainted by the rain, the mud, and the nagging awareness that the enemy, though wounded, was not yet broken. A heavy rain began to fall, turning the Belgian roads into quagmires, slowing the pursuit and binding the armies to the unpredictable will of the weather. The retreat of the coalition forces led them inexorably to a small, unremarkable depression of land near a village whose name would soon become eternal: Waterloo. Wellington chose his ground with the cold genius of a chess master. He positioned his main force upon a ridge, hidden from Napoleon's direct view by the crest, utilizing the reverse slope to shelter his troops from the French artillery. Below, crucial farmhouses, Hougoumont, La Haye-Sainte, Papelotte, became stone anchors, fortresses in miniature that would decide the flow of the coming battle. The rain continued, relentless and cold, soaking the uniforms, mixing with the soil to form a viscous, exhausting glue that promised to impede every charge and dull the edge of every blade. Across the valley, on the opposing ridge, Napoleon arrived. He surveyed the field with the eyes of a falcon, sensing the strength of Wellington's position, yet confident in his own superiority. He delayed the attack, waiting for the ground to dry, a decision born of caution, but one that gifted precious, irreversible hours to his enemies. As he waited, the sky seemed to breathe with anticipation, the very air thick with unspoken gravity of the moment. Every soldier, French and coalition alike, felt the oppressive presence of destiny, knowing they were poised at the nexus of history. The first shot was fired just before noon, aimed at the farmhouse of Hougoumont. It was a feint, a maneuver intended to draw Wellington's reserves to the right, yet it quickly devolved into a savage, consuming battle. The farm, protected by stone walls and desperate British and German defenders, became a crucible of close-quarter slaughter. Musket fire cracked incessantly, mixing with the guttural cries of men hacking at each other through breaches in the walls. Smoke hung low, thick with the scent of burning wood and death. The battle for Hougoumont raged for hours, drawing more and more French troops into its insatiable maw, consuming resources and draining the emperor's strength without achieving a decisive breakthrough. Next, the massive French artillery began its grim work. Cannons roared across the valley, a relentless, deafening thunder that shook the very ground. Cannonballs screamed through the air, tearing through the coalition ranks, scattering bodies and earth in violent eruptions. The reverse slope protected Wellington's men, yet the psychological toll was immense. Men stood unmoving, disciplined, as their comrades were torn apart by unseen force, the scent of fresh blood mingling with the damp earth, a reminder of their fragile mortality. The air became a conductor of dread, vibrating with the continuous, unyielding assault of iron. Then came the grand infantry assault, d'Erlon's corps. Thousands of French infantry, arrayed in dense columns, marched inexorably up the main slope, their boots splashing through the mud. It was a terrifying sight, a moving wall of blue and steel, bayonets glinting like 1,000 drawn teeth. The coalition line watched, trembling yet holding its breath. The moment the French crested the ridge, the line erupted in a blinding sheet of musket fire. The blast tore gaping holes in the French columns, bodies piling up in chaotic, grotesque heaps. The carnage was instant and absolute, a confrontation between human mass and disciplined firepower. As the French infantry wavered, the unexpected happened. The charge of the British heavy cavalry. They surged over the crest of the ridge, a terrifying wave of steel, horses, and momentum, crashing, into the disorganized French columns. The shock was devastating. Swords flashed, men screamed, and the French formation dissolved into chaos. The cavalry, intoxicated by the speed of their triumph, charged too far, descending into the valley where they themselves were cut down by French lancers and musket fire. It was a moment of magnificent, terrible glory, a costly swing of the pendulum that left the field littered with dead and dying of both sides. The afternoon brought the hour of the grand cavalry charges. Marshal Ney, the bravest of the brave, mistook a shift of British reserves for a general retreat and launched an enormous cavalry assault. Wave after wave of French cuirassiers, dragoons, and lancers, over 9,000 horsemen, thundered across the valley. The sound was deafening, a monstrous tide of hooves shaking the earth, the very air vibrating with the intensity of their approach. Wellington's infantry met the charge by forming squares, human fortresses bristling with bayonets, four sides of unyielding defense against the crushing force of the horsemen. The sight was surreal. Magnificent French cavalry circling the stoic, unmoving squares, unable to break the walls of flesh and steel. Swords clanged against bayonets, horses screamed, and musket volleys roared from the center of the squares, tearing men from their saddles. The air filled with the cries of the frustrated French and the disciplined shouts of the British officers. Time stretched, each minute an eternity of circling, hacking, and dying, as the sheer will of the infantry held firm against overwhelming momentum. Meanwhile, the battle for La Haie Sainte, the central farmhouse, became critical. Surrounded, starved of ammunition, the German king's German legion fought with suicidal courage. Every shot, every desperate stand was counted. The French threw everything they had at the farmhouse, knowing its capture would split Wellington's line in two. The walls eventually gave way, the defenders overwhelmed and slaughtered. The fall of La Haie Sainte opened a gaping wound in the coalition center, allowing the French to bring artillery forward and deliver murderous point-blank fire onto the British line. As the late afternoon sun began to pierce through the clearing clouds, the battle teetered on the edge of collapse for the coalition. Wellington's line was strained, bleeding, and almost broken. He watched the horizon, his face grim, waiting for the one salvation that could avert total disaster. The Prussians. Blucher, the tireless septuagenarian field marshal, had promised to come, pushing his battered army through the Belgian mud after Ligny. Now, his troops began to appear on the horizon, spilling from the woods near Papelotte, pressing against Napoleon's flank. Their arrival was a sound of salvation, distant bugle calls, the steady drumbeat of marching feet, a promise of new bodies and fresh will. Napoleon saw them, and in a final, desperate gamble, he committed his ultimate reserve, the Imperial Guard. These were the veterans, the legends, the men who had never known defeat when led by the Emperor. Forming 5 massive squares, they marched up the ridge, their movement slow, deliberate, the very embodiment of unstoppable pride. They were the last hope, the final throw of the dice. The coalition forces watched their approach with a paralyzing mix of awe and terror. They knew the Guard's reputation, the weight of their legacy. As the Guard crested the hill facing the tattered remnants of the British line, the atmosphere was electric. Then Wellington gave the order that echoed across the field, "Up Guards and at them!" The British Guards rose from the ground where they had been sheltering and unleashed a massive point-blank volley of musket fire. The sudden shock, the proximity, and the overwhelming discipline shattered the French column. The great Imperial Guard, the legendary invincible force, wavered. Then came the impossible sound: the Guard retreats. The cry, borne on the wind, spread like wildfire through the French ranks. The Emperor's personal perfect machine had been broken. Panic seized the Grande Armée. Their formation dissolved into a terrified, chaotic flight. The appearance of the Prussians on the flank turned the retreat into a full-scale rout. Napoleon stood amidst the chaos, watching his empire dissolve into dust and blood. His final orders were ignored, his desperate attempts to rally his men swallowed by the rising tide of fear. He himself was nearly captured in the maelstrom, saved only by a final disciplined square of the old Guard, who faced the charging Prussians and British with stoic, suicidal defiance, covering the Emperor's escape. As night fell, covering the fields of Waterloo in a thick, cold blanket, the carnage was unimaginable. Mud, blood, and rain mixed into a grotesque slurry, covering the thousands of dead and wounded. The air was filled with the terrible sounds of the aftermath, the moans of the dying, the terrified screams of riderless horses, the weary, disbelieving shouts of the victorious. The Battle of Waterloo was over. It was not merely a defeat. It was the final, absolute destruction of the Napoleonic legend. The storm that had raged across Europe for 2 decades was finally spent. The era of the Emperor was over, swallowed by the mud, the rain, the disciplined fire of Wellington's line, and the tenacious will of Blucher's Prussians. And across the dark, silent field, the victory felt cold, heavy, and profound. A moment when destiny, having played its hand, finally settled the score, leaving behind a legacy of courage, cunning, and the stark, unending memory of the day the world stopped holding its breath.